welcome to Well Within Reach. And today we have Sophia Friedeborn, who is our registered dietitian here at the Frazier Family Coalition. And she's going to be talking about stroke nutrition education. And we're just so glad to have you here. Hello, Sophia.
Hi, Dr. White. Thanks for having me here today. Happy to be here and share a little bit of the knowledge that I have on this topic.
Very good. So the first question I wanted to ask you, because we get this question quite a lot, what are the main nutrition recommendations that you have to prevent a stroke?
So with stroke prevention, the recommendations tend to be kind of grouped within the cardiac cardiac care realm as well. So, a lot of the conditions that affect the heart can also affect the blood vessels in your brain and all of that good stuff. So we really kind of work on like high blood pressure nutrition management, high cholesterol or atherosclerosis nutrition management, and high blood sugar nutrition management. And so within all of those categories, there's different nutrition recommendations that we might recommend. So if you have one or more, you might have different recommendations that someone that only has one or doesn't have any of those conditions. But in general, for stroke prevention or after having a stroke, the diets that we recommend tend to be more of the Mediterranean style diets. And we've adapted those further as we've kind of researched more about stroke and the nutrition that kind of helps the most with brain health and cognitive function. So there's also the DASH diet, which is dietary approaches to stop hypertension. And this really focuses on, minimizing salt and saturated fat in the diet, mainly focusing more on, vegetables, fruits, whole grains, low-fat dairy, or fat-free dairy, fish, poultry, beans, nuts and seeds, and your vegetable oils, and kind of minimizing some of the fatty meats, some full fat dairy, sugar sweetened beverages, ultra processed foods, lots of sweets in the diet, and your sodium intake. And then the MIND diet is actually an adaptation of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet. So it combines the two. So it's Mediterranean interventions to stop neurodegenerative diseases. And so this focuses really primarily on brain health. And this puts an extra focus on things like berries and green leafy vegetables. So it's a little bit more specific maybe than the DASH or just like the general Mediterranean dietary patterns would be. And then in general, plant-forward diets are seen to be the most beneficial for overall heart and kind of brain health, still including omega-3 fatty acids in the ways that you can. So again, fatty fish, or really making sure that we're getting in enough, walnuts and hemp hearts if you are completely, plant-based.
Okay. So we talked about what are the main recommendations. What foods do you think people should limit?
So in general, it's best to avoid foods that are high in salt and saturated fat. Now, if you're not someone that has high blood pressure or blood pressure problems, you can kind of make your best judgment on it if you need to be minimizing sodium or not. But in general, we kind of say, let's limit the sodium, let's limit the saturated fat. And these are found in foods like your red and processed meats. So specifically, think your deli meats, think sausages, hot dogs, pepperoni. These are all foods that just, again, are very high in salt and saturated fat. For saturated fat specifically, think your solids versus your liquid fats. So butter, lard, beef tallow, ghee, coconut oil, and palm oil are considered saturated fats. And your unsaturated fats are going to be liquid at room temperature. And these are your vegetable oils, your seed oils, avocado oil, extra virgin olive oil. So the ones that are solid at room temperature, your saturated fats, these are the ones that we want to minimize. And then we also want to look at maybe canned foods. So not all canned foods are bad, right? There's a lot of foods that come in the can that are still really good for us, but we really maybe want to look for low sodium options, things that maybe aren't in juice, for example. The fruits should be in or in syrup, right? We don't want them to be in syrup. If we're going to be getting fruit from a jar or a can, maybe in 100% juice. And um let's see, any pre-prepared, pre-packaged foods, those tend to also be a little bit higher in salt and a little bit higher in your saturated fats or your trans fats. And those are kind of grouped together. So I didn't mention trans fats, but trans fats are a lot like saturated fats, but they're man-made. And these are found in things like margarines, again, more of your processed foods, pastries, and things like that. You'll find a lot of like trans and saturated fats. So with canned foods, we look for low sodium. And for anything outside of that, right? If you're maybe eating out a lot, when we eat out a lot, we tend to have higher sodium diets and have higher fat diets because foods outside of the home tend to be made with more sodium and fat. So these are things that we also want to minimize as much as we can. It's not to say that we can't enjoy these things from time to time, but trying to minimize again. If you're at 5 times a week eating out right now, let's bring it down to 2 to 3 or something like that.
Okay. So, how do we get started? How can people realistically make these mealtime changes or, just make it a little bit healthier? Baby steps, trying to get a little closer to some of the nutrition recommendations that you've presented today?
Yeah, no, it's definitely hard to make 100 changes all at once, right? So we kind of want to start with maybe some simpler ways to add maybe more nutrition or minimize some of those things that we mentioned to kind of limit or avoid. I think the best recommendation that I can kind of have is focus on more plants and hydration, right? So make sure that you're still getting enough water intake. And I know that that's not necessarily nutrition, but it is. It goes hand in hand with it. So hydration is incredibly important, especially for managing things like blood pressure. And when it comes to, plant forward foods, again, across the board and almost, I'm not going to say in all studies, but in almost all studies that we have kind of tested the difference between more plant forward diets versus, more meat heavy diets, we see more beneficial health outcomes in folks that eat more plant forward diets. Does that mean you have to give up all your meat or animal products? Absolutely not, right? But include some more plant-based proteins into that. Maybe instead of focusing your meal pattern around, oh, what goes well with this meat, how can I, make a dish that goes around a vegetable, right? So maybe it's a nice salad and you can still include a grain in that salad and you can include some type of a plant-based protein. So I think exploration here is also something that I would love people to just get more curious in the kitchen, right? Try using different foods and protein sources to meet your needs. So beans, I'm going to say just beans, just add beans to your diet. Honestly, beans are one of the, powerhouses in the nutrition world. Lentils or beans doesn't really matter. If you're not able to sit and wait for the beans to cook, for example, lentils are a much faster cooking legume. And so that's something that might be easier to implement into the diet. But if you can, canned low sodium, canned beans, if you can find that, I see people blending, white beans into their tomato sauce all the time. And it doesn't have much of a flavor change. The texture is going to be a little bit different, but the flavor is really still there as like that tomato sauce. And so that's an easy way for folks who maybe don't like beans to get that extra serving in. And I say beans a lot because we just see that people who eat beans more regularly, their LDLs go down, or they just have lower LDL cholesterol at baseline, which is your lousy cholesterol.
Well, I feel like we've got a whole nutrition class in just a short amount of time, Sophia. While you've packed this with a lot of good advice, a lot of excellent recommendations. And, we're just so grateful to have you with us. I'm going to give you one last word before we conclude.
Eat more fiber. And fiber is found in plants. We're just going to go with that because 95% of Americans are not meeting our fiber recommendations. And so I think if there's one thing that you can do to substantially increase your health, it's going to be fiber intake.
All right. Well, there you have it, folks. Thank you so very much. We appreciate all your information, all your education, knowledge. And she's with us here at the Frazier Family Coalition. We have our Lunch and Learn twice a month. We have our produce giveaway. We have our Diet Mastering Diabetes class. So there's a lot going on here at Frazier, and we're just so grateful to have you.
I would say if you're curious about more plants, definitely try to come to one of our lunch and learns because we really do try to make a lot of really tasty plant-based dishes. That again, we kind of try to incorporate all of these nutrition recommendations into the meals that we prepare for the community.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.